We are now in the sixth part of Kings and Generals English Civil War series. The link to this video is down in the description down below. And before I get started, I want to quickly ask you all to please like, comment, and subscribe to my small but humble channel. It'll really help it grow, and I would appreciate it very much. With that said, and without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let's watch the sixth part of Kings and Generals, the English Civil War.
Defying his usually cautious nature and unwilling to stay on the back foot, the Earl of Essex roused his army, composed of 8,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, just before dawn. The general rallied his vanguard, asked whether they were willing to fight, and was met with the reply, "Let us fall upon them. We will, by God's assistance, beat it from them all." With that, Essex led his vanguard of 4,000 infantry and a small number of mounted men out at 6 AM towards the strategic height of Round Hill. The Royalist forces hadn't properly reconnoitred the battlefield, and thus hadn't realised the escarpment's importance. So with relative ease, the parliamentarians took the defensible position. The Cavalier army, made up of 7,000 infantry and a formidable 7,500 cavalry, began filing out of Newbury a few hours after the parliamentarians assembled. While the main force organised itself, the energetic Prince Rupert rode out with 900 musketeers and some cavalry to take Round Hill himself. However, he was shocked to discover that the strategic high point was strongly defended by around 2,500 parliamentarian soldiers, whose presence blocked the Royalists. Realising he couldn't make progress with his current strength, Rupert left the infantry under Colonel George Lissell and rode back to Newbury. News of Round Hill's capture by the Roundheads alarmed the Cavalier leadership, but a swiftly organised war council quickly decided what the objectives and deployment for the day would be. With their plans finalised, Charles I's Royalist army began deploying on a north-south axis in three main sections. A relatively small number of troops, under William Vavasour's overall command, were stationed on the right wing, in the enclosed Kennet River Valley. In the centre, attacking Round Hill, were placed Sir Nicholas and John Byron. Prince Rupert and the majority of Royalist cavalry arrayed on an open area called Wash Common on the left, closer to the Enbourne River. England's second Stuart king raised his royal banner on a hill in the northern Kennet Valley area of the battlefield. It was on this front that the day's first action took place, provoked by parliamentarian artillery fire raining down from Round Hill. Vavasour's royal regiments advanced in the valley's enclosed terrain and amidst dense hedgerows, moving forward on land which was far better suited for defence rather than attack. After a brief, terse clash on this northern flank, the Royalist foot was easily blunted, with heavy losses. However, sensing an opportunity, the triumphant parliamentarian foot launched an attack of their own. This thrust gained some ground, and managed to unbalance Vavasour's ranks, but the intervention of Charles's Lifeguard cavalry blocked it. For the remainder of September 20th, both sides avoided.
Alright, that was an interesting beginning of the battle. Yeah, the Royalists got beaten back. It seemed like they lost a good amount of people, way more than Parliament's side, so that's not a good start. Like I said, it seemed like the Royalists really wanted this fight, but the biggest factor is the defensive position, especially up the hill, that the forces of Parliament have taken, that the Royalists had overlooked. I feel like that's a huge factor already, and you're already seeing that defensive better geography coming into play already on this side. So I'm not sure how they plan on like negating that and taking that, but either way, that's gonna be a bloody affair.
Avoided closing with one another on the northern front. On the approaches to Round Hill, the two Byrons and their respective infantry and
I think the Royalists, they want a complete destruction of the army of Parliament here, because by completely destroying them, having a decisive victory, essentially clears the way for London, right? So their objective is to destroy them. Meanwhile, Essex, his goal is pretty easier: defend and survive. And so long as he keeps his army functioning and not destroyed, that's kind of a strategic victory for him as well, right? So again, I feel like the Royalists have the harder job objective. So yeah.
The units advanced up the slope in an attempt to dislodge the parliamentarians on top. However, their march was spotted, and they were met with fierce resistance from ranks of musketeers and emplaced culverins.
Oh, whoa!
During the vicious fighting which broke out on the hill, and emplaced was spotted.
Yo, look at this horse unit. I completely missed that. They completely went around.
And they were met with fierce resistance from ranks of musketeers and emplaced culverins. During the
oh my gosh, I hit them with the flank. The oldest trick in the book. I'm surprised they pulled that off. Wow.
Fighting which broke out on the hill, an intellectual and anti-war aristocrat known as Lord Falkland, who fought for the Royalists, was killed by a musket ball. Soon after, Cavalier horsemen managed to rout a section of the parliamentarian centre and were close to securing Round Hill. However, professional officers in Essex's reserve saw the danger, plugged the gap, and used disciplined volley fire from muskets to repel the horsemen. The king's forces
so close.
Were stuck in a stalemate here as well. As brutal close-quarters fighting was taking place on Round Hill, Prince Rupert was busy organising 6,000 Royalist horses on Wash Common. When the first line of cavalry was ready, it charged into Sir Philip Stapleton's parliamentarian horse, who hadn't fully formed up on the opposite side of the common. Stapleton managed to put together a defence in time, using new delayed close-range volley tactics to drive the Royalist cavalry back twice. However, amidst the crack of carbines and clang of poleaxes on plate, Prince Rupert managed to turn the parliamentarian cavalry's flank on the third charge, driving them back to Skinner's Green Lane. In the afternoon, reserve units of the London-trained bands strode into the breach on Wash Common.
Yeah, those reserves are coming in clutch. Once again, Rupert shows his superior cavalry leadership. Like, the man was a cavalryman, and every time he personally gets involved with cavalry, he usually wins, as demonstrated there. But, again, these reserved officers are really helping negate every advantage the Royalists managed to gain. Which is good on them, by the way. Like, these guys are coming in clutch.
Left by the cavalry, repulsing a probing charge by Rupert's horse. Instead, the Royalists resorted to a massive artillery barrage aimed at breaking the final parliamentarian ranks. However, the supposedly inferior trained bands, who had no cover on the open plain, defied all expectations and stood stalwartly, maintaining their formation for many hours, even in the face of massed but inactive.
Oh, that's terrifying. They're getting shot and they keep moving and they don't seem to be taking much damage, at least by not the crack showing up yet. Yo, these trained bands, man, what the heck? They're untrained, didn't you just say? But point is, these bands are coming in clutch. They're kind of becoming the MVPs right now for the Parliament's forces.
Accurate culverin fire. Nevertheless, this constant shelling eventually weakened the gallant parliamentarian reserves. When Prince Rupert then led a thunderous mounted charge across the Common's northern sector at around 4 p.m, Essex's trained bands began to break, tearing open his line and threatening to scythe the entire army in two. At precisely that moment, the Earl of Essex bravely galloped onto the scene, riding among his retreating troops and inspiring them to turn around and fight. In one account, a cannonball is said to have landed only a yard from the Lord General, but his personal intervention was necessary. The trained band...
Yeah, he needed to. They were about to completely break. But now the trained band is back on the offensive, or at least fighting. Man, it keeps going. Like, this side's all over the place.
particularly their red and blue units, turned around and charged at the Royalists, reforming their formation and stabilizing the front. After some subsequent lighter combat, both armies began disengaging at 7 p.m. after a ruthless 14-hour stalemate.
Oh my god, 14 hours of straight combat. Wow.
Charles's forces retreated all the way to Newbury, where they stayed the night and conferred about what to do. The next morning, the Royalists chose to not re-engage, either because of depleted gunpowder supplies or because the High Command simply lost its nerve. Both armies lost about the same number of troops, at 1,300 each, and even though Rupert had come close to victory, Essex escaped back to London in the aftermath.
Strategic victory. Again, Rupert and the Royalists wanted to destroy Essex. That would have cleared the way to London. They failed in their objective, so this was I consider this kind of a strategic victory for Parliament right here, right?
Newbury was just as tactically inconclusive as Edge Hill had been the year before. Nevertheless, the battle would have far-reaching consequences. Although the King's armies were dominant in every theatre as 1643 came to an end, parliamentarian allies in the far north were about to change the nature of the entire war. The Royalist summer had ended. By the time October of 1643 came around, the two kingdoms of Charles I had been embroiled in a bitter civil war for well over a year. The grave consequences of this violence slowly began to reveal themselves as the months went on, as atrocities against one's fellow countrymen became even more common on both sides, while the gentlemanly warfare of the early war faded away. As the Earl of Essex and his Royalist enemies were locked in the bloody First Battle of Newbury, political dealings between Parliament and the Scottish Covenanter government were reaching a conclusion which would intensify the war to an even greater degree. The parliamentarians needed a strong military ally to win the war, and the Covenanters possessed an army ready to march. In return for a promise to implement the Presbyterian religious system in England, Scotland would help to crush Charles's Royalists.
If I remember from Historia Civilis's telling, wasn't it after Charles had essentially lost, he fled to Scotland and wanted them to invade? So, if I'm remembering correctly, that would mean that somewhere down the line, Parliament and Scotland are about to... That's a smart use of diplomatic warfare from Parliament, though. Quickly open up a new front with a fresher foe, in Scotland, and get them to essentially really put more pressure on the Royalists. That's actually just a great move.
Months of back-and-forth negotiation, the so-called Solemn League and Covenant was finalized on September 25, 1643. Meanwhile, the king was bolstering his forces for the next confrontation, as Royalist soldiers, previously tied down in Ireland, began returning home. As 1644 began, the north of England came under decisive Royalist control by the efforts of William Cavendish, Earl of Newcastle. This all changed on January 16th, when the Covenanter army, made up of 18,000 foot, 3,000 cavalry, 600 dragoons, and 120 cannons, crossed the River Tweed and invaded England.
Oh, that's so bad. Dang, great move on Parliament's part, though, I have to say.
Territory, entering the war on Parliament's side. It was led by the illustrious veteran of Lutzen, Alexander Leslie, the Earl of Leven. Leven's advance towards Newcastle was almost unopposed, but Cavendish quickly received word of the invasion and managed to beat the Scots to the city, mainly because Leven had to wait for his heavy cannons to arrive by ship. When he finally arrived before the city walls on February 3rd, he found many of the suburbs burned to the ground by Cavendish's defending force.
Scorched earth?
Who were now reinforced by 5,000 men. Nevertheless, the Tyneside city was put under siege. However, constant harassment of Scottish supply lines by veteran Royalist cavalry and lack of shelter provoked by the defenders' scorched earth tactics, forced Leven to depart with most of his army on the 22nd. Only 6 regiments of the Covenanter army remained to continue the siege. Unwilling to let his enemy escape unhindered, Cavendish set out in pursuit with most of his own troops. Over the next few weeks, Leven and Cavendish maneuvered around one another, unwilling to engage because of the unfavorable terrain and bad weather. Finally, in late March, Leven engaged and defeated his foe in a close battle near Sunderland, forcing him to flee in the direction of York. By this loss, the northern forces of the king needed help immediately, and their main hope for such assistance rested with Prince Rupert, who set off towards Yorkshire to relieve...
Rupert, man, he is the MVP for the Royalists.
Cavendish's battered host. In a brilliantly executed campaign, Rupert's meagre army broke a siege at the strategically crucial Royalist stronghold of Newark on March 22nd, with the prince almost losing his life in the attempt. Instead of continuing...
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about, Rupert's life, because if this dude dies, a lot of the Royalist cause is kind of screwed from then on, right? So I'm worried about it, like, you gotta keep this dude alive.
March, the dashing cavalier withdrew to his base at Shrewsbury to raise more men, but barely had time to relax before terrible news came from the south. A week after Rupert's triumph in Nottinghamshire, William Waller got his revenge for Roundway Down by defeating Hopton's Royalist army at the Battle of Cheriton, a defeat which ended any prospect of Royalist victory in the south. Royalist fortunes had even begun to sour in Yorkshire, when on April 12th, an army of Sir Thomas Fairfax defeated John Bellacy at the town of Selby, and routed a significant portion of York's intended garrison. After receiving word of the unfolding disaster, the Earl of Newcastle force-marched his army for the second time in just under a year, hoping to reinforce York's defences before the parliamentarians could get there. Once again, he succeeded.
Yeah, definitely. Like, before, in this battle, in this war, a lot of the battles were being won by the Royalists. The momentum was definitely in their court, but now suddenly everything has changed. The moment Scotland got involved, and now all of this, the tides are turning, right?
Despite losing many stragglers and deserters along the way, reaching the northern Royalist bastion on April 15th. 3 days later, the Covenanter army closed in on Wetherby and rendezvoused with the parliamentary army of Sir Thomas Fairfax, fresh from its victory at Selby. Together, starting on the 22nd, the Allies put England's great northern city to siege. Charles I knew that if York fell, the north would fall. To deal with the sudden strategic crisis that the war effort now faced, leading Royalist commanders assembled at Oxford on April 25th for a council of war. After vigorous debate, Prince Rupert gained the upper hand. It was decided that the remnant of Hopton's defeated army would be absorbed into Charles's central army at Oxford, and this newly bolstered force would stay on the defensive. Meanwhile, Rupert himself would raise several thousand troops and go north to relieve York. With that decided, Rupert arrived back in Shrewsbury on May 6th to begin mustering his own men. On that same day, on the other side of England, the Eastern Association Army under Manchester and Cromwell took Lincoln, freeing them up to start marching to Yorkshire as well.
Oh, dang. Okay, they're gonna end up having to, like, come across each other. And again, there's already the besieging of York going on, and if Cromwell on his side also managed to get there, that Rupert's fighting an uphill battle. Like I said, I've called Rupert kind of the main guy of the Royalist side, but even those odds would seem just almost like beyond unfavorable, is putting it lightly, right? We're gonna have to see. The dude's gonna have to put in some work, but those odds are incredibly bad.
Rupert's march began later in the month, with an attempt to assert Royalist authority in Lancashire. He first bypassed the firmly parliamentarian town of Manchester, but subsequently seized and ravaged nearby Bolton. After fighting for the town came to an end, no mercy was given, and up to 1,000 soldiers and civilians were slaughtered.
My goodness.
This massacre helped bolster parliamentarian propaganda. After all, if the king was relying on such butchery of English people to win this war, was he truly their king? In Bolton, Rupert received a welcome surprise when 5,000 royalist cavalry joined his army from the northeast. These were the Earl of Newcastle's horsemen, who had been prudently sent away before the siege began. This cavalry would be useless in such a situation. As Rupert secured Liverpool and cemented royalist control of Lancashire, the king disregarded the southern defensive strategy and embarked on a military campaign in the region. It was a disaster, leading to the breach of Oxford.
Dang it, Charles. Charles, why did you deviate from the plan? You all agreed. Be defensive. Let Rupert handle this. Man. That's bad.
Its defensive ring of garrisons, and forcing Charles to flee to Worcester, with Essex and Waller hot on his heels. At this point, the king, realizing Prince Rupert's advice to only consolidate and defend in the south should not have been ignored, sent a set of ambiguous orders, which essentially left Rupert to make his own mind up. We'll talk about this theatre more down the line. Upon receiving the communiqué, the Cavalier General interpreted the unclear command in his own way. He would relieve York, as well as destroy the parliamentarians and their Scottish allies, before victoriously marching south to save the king.
Yeah, Charles made this. I was already like, Rupert has a lot on his hands. Relieving York on its own, especially if Cromwell also shows up there, is already, I said, like, a huge task to perform on his own. And now Charles has made it even worse, put more strain on the guy by his incompetence and now getting himself put in this situation because he deviated from the plan. Wow, now Rupert's just one dude. Like, yeah, he's been so far the best of, you know, the royalist forces, but he's still just one guy, and he can't do it all. Again, this is ambitious, but it's almost, it almost feels a bit too idealistic, I suppose. Like, realistically, that this seems like he would have to, like, perfectly not only relieve York and destroy the parliamentarian armies, but then move and do it again with Essex, who he hasn't been able to do it for. Like, optimistic plan, but I don't think realistic. It doesn't feel realistic. And again, Rupert's good, but even this is a lot for one guy to handle. Man, this is bad. This is already bad.
After the campaign that was about to happen, he would carry that letter from the king for the rest of his life. Rupert's relief army, now about 14,000 strong, set off to relieve
What do you mean for the rest of his life? Oh, is he gonna die? I've been worried. I'm like, this dude, I'm afraid he's about to die. And then from then on, oh man.
News that the prince's army was only a day away caused the allies to hastily lift their siege. They withdrew to proactively meet the royalist army, moving their large combined force onto a ridge near a village 5 miles southwest of York, known as Long Marston. The Knaresborough Road, which Rupert was using to march his army, crossed immediately in front of this ridge, with the River Nid behind it. This rendered the direct route to York almost impossible to navigate for the royalists without having a dangerous enemy army threatening their flank. Rather than risk such an attack, the wily prince resorted to deception. Just before dawn on July 1st...
Yeah, Rupert realizes he needs to carry so hard. He's gonna have to use every trick in the book to, like, get one up on his adversaries. I don't know how... He has 14,000, he said. I'm not sure how much they would have. They would have to have way more than that, right? All Parliament plus Scotland combined? Oof.
Royalist horsemen were spotted advancing up the Knaresborough Road. To the parliamentarians and Scots, it was apparent that this force of cavalry were Rupert's vanguard, with the obvious implication that his main army was only a short while away. Accordingly, they drew up their men in battle formation and waited for the bulk of Rupert's army to arrive. However, the royalist vanguard was just an illusion, luring Leven, Fairfax and the others into a false sense of security. While it did everything that a normal vanguard was expected to do, Charles's illustrious nephew swung the majority of his army north at Knaresborough town, crossed the Ouse at Boroughbridge, and was encamped in Gultree's forest by nightfall.
Dang. Alright, I'm loving the deception that he's using. Again, I've been kind of keeping my eye on Rupert the entire series. He's the one who's impressed me the most, and he's the one that, like, I'm kind of following, and kind of like, alright, dude, let's see. If he dies, I'm gonna be so sad. I'm gonna be like, dang it.
Then his forces advanced even further, scattering a small detachment of enemy dragoons at Nether Poppleton and securing a boat bridge there.
Ooh.
Realizing they had been outwitted.
Dang, he completely... I am so impressed. Dude, Rupert completely humbugged them. Completely went around them. Dang, and he's like right there with the sit. Dude. Again, I'm liking Rupert. So far, he's been my favorite character of this entire series.
And fearing Rupert would be able to cut their supply lines to the south if he gave them the slip again, most of Parliament's combined army began marching south to Tadcaster, while its cavalry remained at Marston Moor, covering the retreat. At about the same time, the Royalist cavalry, which had previously been ordered to leave the city by Newcastle, strode back into York under Lord George Goring, and formally relieved the city.
Wow.
In a brilliant maneuver, which was arguably one of his greatest in the entire Civil War, Rupert had saved old Roman Arboricum without firing a shot.
Amazing. Dude, Rupert, MVP for the Royalist, man. This guy rocks. I love Rupert. I love this guy. But there is a problem, though. Sure, he has relieved them, but he didn't destroy them, which means they're still a threat. And he can't just leave, or else surely York would... They wouldn't just, like, let York go, so he has to, like, deal with them somehow, right? Before going to save the king, or if he's quick enough, but I don't know. I don't know what his next move is gonna be, but there's still a threat out there. But this is still beyond impressive. This maneuvering, this trick... Man, Rupert is carrying so hard. This guy has so much on him.
Obeying what he thought to be the king's command to relieve York, then defeat Parliament's army, and then come south urgently.
So much to do. Okay, first relieve York, then destroy the combined armies, then go march all the way back, then save the king. That just keeps going, and then just, oh my gosh. I'm worried. Like I said, I'm worried about Rupert. Like, if he dies, I'm gonna mourn. I'm gonna be like crying. Well, not crying, but you know, I will be mourning. But yeah, now he's gonna have to give a full-on decisive battle. And he's gonna, again, his objective is to crush them. So long as his enemies manage to get away, even if he's successful at driving them back, so long as the army remains, that will be a strategic victory for the Parliament side.
Prince Rupert almost immediately gathered his own and Newcastle's men. Bolstered by the reluctant York garrison and their even more reluctant commanders, the prince marched to Marston Moor and visibly challenged the enemy to a pitched battle.
And tomorrow we're gonna see this pitched battle. I'll see you guys then.